So the categories of information is basically what it is about. Do I need facts? Do I want to know? Facts is something that you will get on websites like Statistics South Africa, and that will deal with there are 57 million people in South Africa currently. There are so many people speaking Afrikaans. There are so many people living in the higher income group. There are so many males, so many females. There are so many children between the ages of 14 and 18. You'll get all of those stats on Stats SA. If you go and do a Google search, you'll find a lot of information. Right. You go and check out ClickUp. I think I have mentioned a few sources and tips that you can use for market research as well. The level of awareness, or are your categories of information, maybe you don't just want to look at facts, it may be that you are testing your level of awareness. That's something that they usually use when they do brand awareness. So people want to know, are you aware of this product? Do you actually know the brand name? Do you understand the values that are attached to it? So sometimes they just want to know the level of awareness. It can even work for an author. So are you familiar with Peter Westhuizen's work? What do you know about him? Have you looked at his sculptures and artwork? Have you read some of his poetry, for example? So you're testing people's level of awareness, because that would tell you as a company or as a publishing house how much people know and how much you need to do to increase that level of awareness. Are you testing things like opinions and attitudes? So you would do a book on let's say, for example, sexual education at schools, all right? This is now a hot topic at the moment because people are saying either yes or no for what should and shouldn't be included in the curriculum. So, for example, you're doing a book about that and yours are maybe quite explicit and graphic. You would like to know the opinions and the attitudes of people, because that would determine the degree of explicit content that you would include or not include in your book. If it's, for example, aimed at parents, what is it that they feel comfortable with and what not? Those are things that you need to test with people's opinions or attitudes. Being a vegetarian as opposed to a carnivore, or are you pro Zuma or against Zuma? I don't know, but those kinds of feelings that you're trying to gauge, the opinions and attitudes. Preferences is usually when you want to see, do you prefer that over that? So do you like Pepsi or Coca-Cola, and why? What does this one have that one doesn't have? Even with your book covers, if you have an initial book cover or a draft book cover, and you have one or more two options available and it's ready when you want to do market research, show your target audience both and ask them which one do they prefer, and then also obviously why. So preferences would be, if people have to rank something or choose between two options, what would they do? Motives are very important, because we need to know what drives people. What makes you buy that book and not that one? Or what makes me buy that pair of jeans or that? Why do I prefer Levi's over Gucci? Or why do I prefer Netflix over Showmax? I mean, things like that. It's a preference, but I also want to know the motive. So motives a lot of these things actually all go together, as you'll see. Facts, level of awareness, opinions, preferences, motives. These things go together. So it's not to say that you only need the category of information of solely just facts. You basically want a combination of all of the above. A motive is, I want to buy that coloring in book with the short stories for my kid because I want to keep them busy at home, but I also want them to learn while they play. So as they're coloring in this book, there's a little story at the bottom of the page telling them about something about the picture that they are coloring in. So it may be that the motive of the parent would be that there's something different that they want or expect. Behavior has a lot to do with people's behavior, obviously, but patterns or habits. So yes, I, for example, know every single Sunday my dad goes and buys the Sunday newspaper, the Sunday the Rapport, and he reads it Sundays, and there's a big lunch cooked, and he sits and he listens to music and he just chats and enjoy his little drink, etc., etc. That is what I know. I know the behavior. So I know if I want to plan something, it should fall within that pattern of behavior so that I know, all right? So I know he buys the newspapers on Sunday. If I want to get to him, I need to put an advert of my specific book in that paper because I know he will be reading it. Now, this is a very simplified example, but you see what I'm trying to get at. And behavior can definitely imply how often do you read, what do you read, how do you buy books, how often do you visit a bookstore, do you buy your books at Exclusive Books or at Bargain Books, do you read 3 titles or 1 title a month, etc., etc. Okay, so if we can quickly recap. You have, and I like the fact that I can put this visually for you guys, is first you have to look at the pest analysis, always. Start with a macro, it's like a funnel approach. Start with your macro environment. What is happening in political, economic, social, technological environment, and how is this influencing the publication of my book or the commissioning of my book? Now I have an idea. I do a SWOT analysis on that idea. What are the strengths? What are the weaknesses, opportunities, and threats? Then from that I can have, and what also ties to that is my author profile, a competitor profile, and a readership profile. Now that you know what your objectives are, what you're trying to find out, as well as the categories of information that you need to complete your research, you now need to know, how will I do it? What kind of techniques or tools do I have in order to complete this research? Now here we have these opposites. We have quantitative or qualitative, primary, secondary, internal, and external. So quantitative is basically information or research or data that is quantifiable. So that is numbers. That's a 1, a 2, a 3, a 5, a yes, a no. It's quantifiable. Right, where qualitative, it's more about opinions, feelings. You're testing a social phenomena and people's opinions and attitude towards something. It's when you try and engage, their motivations, their preferences, what their attitude is towards LGBTQ plus genres for teens, etc. Then your primary and secondary research. Now, usually we use a combination, but primary research is when you're doing fresh and new research. We'll get to that in more detail, but that is research that hasn't been done before. You yourself as a researcher are going out into the field and you are doing that research. Secondary research is research that's already available. It's been published. It's available in consumer reports like the PASA report. You go onto SARF's website and you go and download all the information about who watches how many, what TV stations, radio stations. Stats SA have all the figures, blah, blah, blah. So you basically go and look at things and studies that have been done before already to find your information. Usually, I know it's a bit confusing, but usually we start with secondary research. You first go and see what is available. Once you have that and you see, but here are still gaps, then you go and speak to your audience or do then primary research. Internal versus external. Internal data is, as the example I've provided in the previous presentation, is basically if you work for a publishing house, what is the what kind of information is available to you? So that would be sales records. You can go online and go and check Nielsen's reports to see the sales stats of your books. You can speak to your commissioning editors and marketing personnel and ask them about, what was the success of these and these titles, or why didn't these titles sell, etc. You have contracts available. You can see what kind of royalties were paid out. So those internal data is exactly what it says. It's stuff that's available, information that's available for you where you're at. External data is all the stuff that you go and have to get that's outside of the company. So I have to go and speak to my competitor. I have to go and look at competitor catalogs. I have to go out and obtain a consumer research report that I don't have in-house. Or I have to go and see this commissioning editor or this political figure or whatever it may entail to do your research. Another thing in the bubble there on top that's really important, and I think you guys already learned about this in INL, it's basically information ethics and information behavior, but always validate the data. I know there is so much fake news out there, especially now with COVID, but you always have to go and verify and validate the data. If you find a press release that a publishing house sent out, go and do a search and see where else are people talking about it, because then you'll know. The more you see about being published about this, the more you'll know that there is some truth to it. Whereas if it's a weird website that you get this information from, even just the wording of the website, or there's no author visible, or there's no way that you can contact the author, or the source, think about how credible the source is by just using the source. Your secondary research, data sources already available. It's existing research. We also refer to it as historical research. It's easy accessible. Sometimes there are archives that you can just click on and you can download stuff. PASA reports is actually an example. Your competitor catalogs are also an examples. Stats and trend reports. Primary research, as I said, that's something that you do on your own. So that is your own research. You talk to people and you ask them questions about something specific. You need to be consistent in your questioning, because if you're going to want to if you have your research objectives, your research questions drawn up, you need to ask those same questions to the sample that you've chosen. We'll get to sample just now, but that's basically the people that you've selected to answer your questions. There's no use in you asking different questions of different people, because then at the end of the day you wouldn't be able to compare your results because you ask different questions. Right, so be consistent in your questioning. Questionnaires, that is an example of primary research, or a survey, like you do Google Docs, or you use Chimp, Monkey, what's that thing, Monkey, Chimp, whatever. When you use those kinds of things in the olden days, before technology, you would go out with a clipboard and you'll have your printed questionnaire and ask people questions. Previous years, we've had students actually doing that on campus, and they ask students questions and they would actually have them fill out the questionnaires. Interviews, and you know what interviews are. Basically, you schedule an appointment with someone and you and that person have a conversation. You also have predetermined questions that you've set up, and you know what you want to find out from this person. The difference between the two, obviously, is that with questionnaires, people can fill it in their own time and in the comfort of their own homes. But the problem with that also is you don't really have control over how truthfully they answer it. With an interview, it's different because you have that communication. You sit with someone, you can also observe body language, not only, they text and answer via email. It's usually good to have interviews in person, but these days it's difficult. So a Skype or a Zoom meeting would be fine, even an email one, but then still some stuff gets lost in an email. But you will be able to get more in-depth information from an interview, because you can probe, you can have probing questions as well. So if someone says something, that would lead you to another question that wouldn't necessarily have been possible if you didn't actually interact with the person. All right, now sample. Sampling is usually something that my students struggle with as well. It's just because it is something that you guys are not familiar with. So if you say, all right, I'm going to do my primary research, you need to identify, who am I going to ask these questions? Why am I asking these people questions? But you need to have a specific group. Like I mentioned previously, as I gave the example of, if you want to interview moms of kids of a certain age about bullying in schools, because you are commissioning a book on helping parents cope with bullying at schools. Maybe their kids are being bullied, or their kids are the bullies. So you then know, okay, so this is the content of my book. Where then will I find people that would be able to answer the question? So your sample is basically a subset of your target market that fits that profile of your target market that you're asking questions about your book. Right, so that is what a sample is. And a sample needs to be representative as well. So there's no use, my book is aimed at different races, and now I am only asking white people. Right, or I'm only asking Asians, but actually I want to include, different races. So it need to be representative. If your book is, for example, aimed at 18-year-olds to 25-year-olds, don't only ask 18-year-olds. Try and get a few people that represent different age groups, because their views may differ from one another. Right, so a sample is a subset. It needs to be representative of your target audience.